Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is Sam Winchester. I do this podcast every Monday and Friday, and thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for watching and listening and joining me today. I may add another podcast, a third podcast, during the middle of the week this summer. We'll see how it goes. But I mean, I have so much to share in this podcast that I'm not going to get to. I have some other ideas that I was thinking about doing, maybe some shorter videos, and maybe called them, According to Sam leftovers, because inevitably at the end of every podcast that I do, I have information and clips and stuff left over, and thought about maybe, compiling that stuff into a short form video and just call it, According to Sam leftovers, and whatever's left over. If it takes 20 minutes, if it takes 15 minutes, just wrap it up in that. And you may say, well, why not just do an hour and a half podcast? Why not just do a 2-hour podcast? There's a lot of media saturation right now. I mean, people are saturated with media and options, and so I want to keep things bite sized, so it won't be too long, so I don't lose people's attention. But there's so much to cover. I have a lot to cover in the podcast today. There's going to be stuff left over. I'll probably pick this up in the next podcast, but we're going to pick up talking about what we were talking about in the last podcast, what's going on in Israel and in Gaza. I did 2-3 months of podcasts talking about the war in Ukraine, breaking down the war in Ukraine, from a nuts and bolts point of view, telling you how the war started, going back to, before the Orange Revolution in 2004. I told you about the Orange Revolution. I told you about Soros and Open Society and his involvement there. We talked about 2014 and the coup d'etat and Euromaidan and what happened after Euromaidan, and our involvement, how we went over there and encouraged that war and all of that. So I, did months of podcasts breaking that down. I haven't really talked a lot in this podcast about what's going on in Israel. And the reason why I haven't talked about what's going on in Israel is because what's going on in Israel is so nuanced. There are so many things that I have to lay out the way that I laid out Ukraine from a nuts and bolts perspective to give you my According to Sam perspective of what's going on in Israel. And if you think that what's going on in Israel started October 7th, then you have no idea what's going on in Israel. I'm reading this book right now. It's called The Gifts of the Jews by Thomas Cahill. And it's interesting because when I started reading the book, this was after, if you've been listening to this podcast all year, I did a series of podcasts going into Mesopotamia. I broke down what Mesopotamia means, the land between two rivers. That's where the name Mesopotamia comes from. We talked about the Sumerian people, started talking about the way their society was constructed. I told you that I was going to go from talking about the Sumerians to the Akkadians to the Babylonians. And I had to lay all of that Mesopotamian history out to explain who Abraham was. Abram was his name. But Abram, who came out of the the Sumerian city of and his name was changed to Abraham, and I have to go through and explain all of that. So that's what I had started doing in those podcasts, and then got sidetracked talking about Ukraine. But when I do get back into the deep study of what's going on in Israel, I'm going to have to, finish laying out the Mesopotamian and Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian society there that Abraham came from. And in this book, The Gifts of the Jews, it starts out in Mesopotamia. So Thomas Cahill, he understood the same way. I mean, before I started reading the book, I had already planned out that I have to tell this story about what's going on in Israel from Mesopotamia, the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian culture there. And that's what he does in that book. And I just thought that it was really interesting. So, because you have to there's so much to lay out. I have to lay out the Abrahamic covenant. I have to get into the Bible and explain the Abrahamic covenant. And if you don't think the Abrahamic covenant has anything to do with the conflict going on in Israel and in Gaza right now, you have no idea what's going on. You have no idea what's going on. I have to explain the Balfour Declaration. I have to explain what happened after the Oslo Accords. People, it's funny. You remember that when they had that riot in Virginia, in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I guess it was when Trump had first come into office, and there was a riot because they were taking down the statue of Robert E. Lee, and you had neo-Nazis there, and they were facing off against a bunch of protesters who wanted to pull the statues down. A woman gets killed. They had the they just happened to have the Unite the Right rally the night before, and the guys with the tiki torches, all that stuff was cleverly crafted, people. It was cleverly crafted. But you remember the controversy about Donald Trump saying that there's fine people on both sides, and he was taken out of context. He never said that the neo-Nazis were fine people. As a matter of fact, he goes out of his way to say that they should be condemned totally. But it was this controversy about, Donald Trump said there were fine people on both sides. And I think about this conflict with Israel and Gaza, and there really are bad people on both sides of the conflict. In Gaza, on that side of the wall, there are bad people that want the war to continue. And on the other side of the wall, in Israel, there are bad people that want the war to continue. They had an agreement. Yitzhak Rabin, who was the prime minister, who agreed to the Oslo Accords with Yasser Arafat, he wanted peace at all costs. This guy was a war hero. They killed him. The Jews killed him for making peace. They called him a Nazi. He was a war hero. On the other side of the wall, there's Hamas. After the Oslo Accords, they set out to destroy that peace agreement because they don't want peace. They want Israel gone. And that's ultimately what that debate is about what's going on in Israel right now. It's not about what happened on October 7th. It's about the fact that some people believe that Israel, the nation of Israel, should not exist. That's what it comes down to. And if you are not ready to talk about that, if you go to these college kids that are protesting and everything, and people that are blocking the streets and protesting at all these events, and you ask them, should Israel exist at all? And you'll see what they say. That's what this is about. This isn't about October 7th. This isn't about the civilians getting killed in Gaza. This is about, should the nation of Israel exist? And people need to be honest about that. So I'm going to get further into talking about Israel and Gaza. But look at this poll. Look at this poll here. This poll came out just a few weeks. The date on it is October 18th. So I guess this was maybe 2 weeks after the October 7th massacre in Israel. And it says, poll, 57.5% of Muslim Americans. So this isn't 57.5% of Muslims in Qatar or Muslims in Egypt or Muslims in Syria. This is 57.5% of Muslim Americans say Hamas was at least somewhat justified by the tragedy that took place, the massacre that took place on October 7th. It's almost 60% of American Muslims that say that Hamas is somewhat justified. So this was just, 2 weeks after that tragedy where people were massacred in Israel. And this is American Muslims in this poll saying 60% saying that what Hamas did was somewhat justified. So what I'm telling you is that this isn't about, they see this as warfare. They see this as, and that's why they're chanting from the river to the sea. And the Jews know that. The people that are complaining, when they hear that, they know what you're saying. That they're saying that they're going to wipe the nation of Israel into the Mediterranean Sea, basically. That the nation of Israel should not exist. Now you may say, well, these people are anti-Semitic. Okay, they're anti-Semitic. They don't think that the nation of Israel should exist. But the really interesting thing that you saw a couple of weeks ago when these protests were going on at the college campuses, and you've seen this at protests all over the country, where you have Jews and people, saying, "Look, I'm a Jew." People at these protests with yarmulkes on and the Hamas, what is it called, kefi, or that Hamas scarf with the yarmulke, and that's so prevalent that you see all of these Jews that are agreeing with these Muslims. A lot of Jews. So that kind of really kind of makes you think that what's going on here, because you can say that it's anti-Semitic, but you have all these Jews that support this opinion. Are they being anti-Semitic? They are Semites. They celebrate Passover and Yom Kippur, and they've been, they've been circumcised and had brisks, and they're Jewish. they go to the synagogue, but they agree. Like people like this, like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is a Jew. He's a Jewish man. Listen to what he says.
Israel has broken international law. It has broken American law. And in my view, Israel should not be receiving another nickel in U.S. military aid. Look, the facts are quite clear. Hamas is a terrible, disgusting terrorist organization that began this war. But what Israel has done over the last 7 months is not just gone to war against Hamas, it has gone to war against the entire Palestinian people, and the results have been absolutely catastrophic.
So, and you may say, well, Bernie Sanders is a kook. He's, old leftist, communist kook from Vermont. There's a lot of Jews like Bernie Sanders. A lot. like this guy and what's the other guy, Norman Finkelstein, and I mean, I can name them. I mean, just go to Pierce Morgan's had them all on his show debating Alan Dershowitz. And there is a lot of them, but it's not only Bernie Sanders, those like Bernie Sanders and Norman Finkelstein. It's a lot of very young Jews that are against the nation of Israel and the existence of the nation of Israel. This woman, she's a filmmaker, Simone Zimmerman. I want you to listen to a little bit of what she says. And then I'm going to show you the trailer of the film that she just made called Israelism.
You are somebody who has become something of a public face for a generation of young Jewish Americans who are publicly questioning, critiquing Israel and Zionism. When you were a teenager, and we talk about some of your experiences in the film, did you ever imagine that you'd be where you are today?
I mean, well, I was definitely raised to think that I would be a Jewish leader of some kind. Unfortunately for many of the people who gave me that message, they're probably not so happy with the type of leader I became. But
it's not quite how they imagined.
Yeah, but it's definitely, I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but I think one of the jokes that we make, but it's actually quite serious, and a lot of the Jewish left organizing that I'm part of is that many of us have become people who have taken on the type of leadership, who are, so devoted to our communities, who are working like tirelessly to build, a Jewish life and a Jewish community that aligns with our values, which is actually exactly what so many of us were raised to want to do. But unfortunately for the old guard of our community, we're not doing it with the same political commitments or positions that they perhaps wanted us to take. And that's one of the kind of great ironies of some of this work, because there's a lot of panic in the American Jewish community about assimilation, about young Jews staying involved and connected to the community. And some of the most effective work to keep young Jews engaged in Jewish life is actually left-wing anti-occupation, anti-apartheid organizing.
Anti-apartheid organizing. She's Jewish. If you watch this whole interview, she goes into, just like I was saying, she observes all the high holidays. Her parents speak Yiddish. She's as Jew as they come. And I'm going to show you this. She's against the nation of Israel. She's against what she calls apartheid in Israel. This is the trailer of her movie, Israelism. Take a listen, watch.
Some American Jews who come here say, we came to Israel and we left from Palestine.
The non-Jewish community does not understand our obsession with Israel.
I went to a Jewish day school.
Summer camp, organized trips to Israel.
You want to go to Israel too? Yeah!
Israeli soldiers, they're hot, they're awesome, they're strong.
We actually have had quite a few of our former students join the IDF. And these are kids, these are 18, 19-year-olds. Amazing.
I told my parents I don't even need to apply to college. I'm gonna just join the Israeli military.
10% of my graduating class joined the Israeli army.
We were deployed to the West Bank.
I don't think I realized the extent to which what I would come to see on the ground would really shock me and horrify me.
When people look at the West Bank today and say, this is an apartheid system, it's not just throwing out a word.
Palestinians live in, day out, without experiencing a day of freedom.
You see what non-democracy looks like.
What we've been told is that the only way that Jews can be safe is if Palestinians are not safe. The more I learned about that, the more I came to see that as a lie.
Within the Jewish community,
another Jewish man,
They're really angry at the way they were indoctrinated, justifiably so.
When we talk about we're losing the kids, we lost them. I think they're a little super naive.
Anytime you cut against the grain, you're going to catch hell.
You are a self-loathing Jew. Go kill yourself.
An anti-Semitic Jew.
The way that we talk about anti-Semitism isn't about protecting Jews, it's about protecting Israel. How dangerous is that?
They will do anything to preserve unconditional support for Israel.
The great irony is that there actually is resurgent anti-Semitism.
There's the Jews will not replace us. Those are the Unite the Right the night before the Charlottesville. So there's bad people on both sides, and there's good people on both sides. You see, I mean, there's no unity in Israel. If you've been paying attention to what's going on there, they're having huge protests and rallies against Netanyahu and the government there. And I mean, there's Palestinians that are on that side of the wall that want peace. So there's good people and bad people on both sides. There's good people and bad people on both sides. And so this conflict is so nuanced. There's so much, that you have to understand. And I'm going to break it down for you. We will get into it in a future podcast. But what I want to talk about is the political aspects on Joe Biden and what this means for his reelection, because we are in an election year, and what the war in Israel, how it threatens his reelection. Now, in my last podcast, I continued to say, I think I said it like 4 times, that Joe Biden was playing checkers while Johnson was playing chess. It's the other way around is what I meant. The other way around is that that Biden sees himself as a chess master and that everybody else is stupid and playing checkers. And he doesn't. He's been in politics for 50 years. This guy understands politics very well, and he's a man of very low character. So, so I want you to take a look at this clip. This was a clip that people dug up of Biden from 2 years ago, or from 2019. I'm sorry. And I think this might have been when Trump. Well, no, it has to do with Israel. So anyway, this is Joe Biden in 2019. Take a listen.
News this week, to the extent that some of the Democrats are saying that if, because of Israel's settlements policy, that they would look at cutting off military aid to Israel as a result of that.
That'd be a tragic mistake. I strongly oppose Israel's settlement policy on the West Bank. I've made that clear to Bibi when I was vice president. I made it crystal clear to the Israelis. But the idea that we would cut off military aid to an ally, our only true ally in the entire region, is absolutely preposterous. It's just beyond my comprehension anyone would do that.
It's beyond my comprehension that anyone would do that. Cut off military aid to our ally, Israel. He's against the settlements in the West Bank, but he doesn't understand why anyone would do what he's doing right now, cutting off military aid to our allies. So Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and the State Department issued a report from the State Department on what's going on in Gaza, the operation there. And I want you to take a listen to what the Biden's State Department found. And again, I explained in the last podcast, and this is my theory. I believe that Joe Biden is privately, that he is supporting Israel and Netanyahu and their move into Rafah. He's privately wants them to go in and finish the job right away, that's what they're doing. They're going in, and then publicly he's coming out and saying that he's against it, and that if Israel moves into Rafah, that he's going to cut off weapons. He's already given them enough weapons to do the job. They have plenty of weapons, so that's all part of the show. The pausing of these weapons. So then his State Department comes out with this report, and take a listen to what Biden's State Department found.
State Department for us. So, Olivia, what more did we learn from this report? Sure, Lana. Well, we just got this report. It's a 46-page declassified report moments ago, and it's the result of a joint review led by multiple bureaus within the State Department, as well as top diplomats here, with input from the Pentagon and the White House. Officials also reviewed reports from NGOs, including the UN, media reports, and information, of course, supplied by the Israeli government. The headline is that it does not conclude that Israel is currently in violation of any U.S. or international humanitarian laws.
So the State Department, Joe Biden's State Department does not conclude that Israel is in violation of any international humanitarian laws, that they haven't done anything that violates these humanitarian laws. They're not committing a genocide, no matter how much you call me Genocide Joe and say that they're committing a genocide. The Biden State Department says that's not true. They're not doing any of that, is what Biden's State Department says. Now, Tony Blinken, he was on the Sunday shows yesterday. He went on Meet the Press, and he was also on, I believe, Face the Nation. It was either Face the Nation or CNN State of the Union, but he was on this program and another program yesterday, and he was defending this report. I want you to take a listen to this interview.
Secretary Blinken, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Morning, Kristen.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to start with that State Department report that did not draw a definitive conclusion about Israel, whether it's violated international law. Amnesty International says of the report, this is the, quote, international version of sending thoughts and prayers. Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen says it ducks the ultimate questions that the report was designed to determine. Mr. Secretary, is the U.S. trying to avoid holding Israel accountable?
Is the U.S. trying to avoid holding Israel accountable? Is Biden trying to avoid holding Israel accountable? Is Biden talking out of the side of his neck when he says that they are? He said in this interview that he did with CNN that Israel has killed civilians. They've killed civilians with our weapons. That it's just wrong. He says it's just wrong. But then the State Department comes out with a report saying they haven't done anything wrong. And so it's not the United States that's trying to let Israel off. While Biden is saying one thing publicly about Israel and the red line that he has, and he's not going to, support their invasion of Rafah, everything that he's doing shows that he's in full support of Israel, that he's in full support of the invasion in Rafah.
Mr. Secretary, is the U.S. trying to avoid holding Israel accountable for its actions?
No. We don't have double standards.
We got double standards.
Israel, one of our closest allies and partners, just as we would treat any other country, including in assessing something like international humanitarian law and its compliance with that law. I would invite people to read the report. They can see for themselves everything that we've laid out in the report. The report also makes clear that this is an incredibly complex military environment. You have an enemy that intentionally embeds itself with civilians, hiding under and within schools, mosques, apartment buildings, firing at the Israeli forces from those places. It's very, very difficult in the heat of war to make a definitive assessment about any individual incident. But
so the obvious question, and Kristen Welker doesn't ask it, that's why I'm a big fan of hers, because this is the obvious question, and you've probably already thought about it, that if they haven't done anything wrong, according to your State Department report, then why are you pausing weapons? What's the motivation for pausing the weapons, Joe Biden, if they haven't done anything wrong? Your State Department says they haven't done anything wrong. They're not doing anything against national humanitarian laws. That everything that they're doing is justified, according to Joe Biden's State Department. That's what his Secretary of State is saying here. Then why are you pausing the weapons? What's that about? What that is about is what I've been telling you it's about. It's a show, because he thinks that the voters in Dearborn are stupid. That's what he thinks. He thinks that they're stupid. He has to. So I want you to take a listen to what Netanyahu is saying, and this is Bibi.
I've known Joe Biden for many years, so 40 years and more. We often had our agreements, but we've had our disagreements. We've been able to overcome them. I hope we can overcome them now, but we will do what we have to do.
See, and I think Bibi's in on it. Biden's CIA director, his Anthony Blinken was over there. They've talked this out. That he knows that they've probably told him when Burns was over there and Blinken were over there. They all had private meetings with him, which were reported. They probably let him know that, look, publicly we're going to have to step away from you publicly, but privately we're going to support you. And Bibi, we need you to go in and we need you to finish the job right away because this is harming my reelection. And I'm going to show you just in a moment, and we'll wrap up by showing you how this is a threat to Joe Biden politically.
We often had our agreements, but we've had our disagreements. We've been able to overcome them. I hope we can overcome them now, but we will do what we have to do to protect our country, and that means protect our future. And that means we will defeat Hamas, including in Rafah. We have no other choice.
We will defeat Hamas, including in Rafah. We have no other choice. And they're already moving into Rafah. They have all the weapons that they need. Joe Biden's already given them the weapons. He's given them all the aid that they need. He's pausing what did Margaret say in the last podcast, a sliver of weapons that don't mean anything to the invasion of Rafah. His State Department is writing a report that completely absolves them of any international humanitarian, offenses. Completely absolves them. Biden's behind Bibi 100% in this invasion of Rafah. He wants him to go in. He wants him to finish it right away because this cannot last all summer and into the fall. Because if it does, Joe Biden is guaranteed to lose, and everybody knows that. And I'm going to explain to you why everybody knows that. You've seen all the protests. You've seen all the, they have been disrupting everything. These Gaza protests. And they're not only going on here in the United States, they're going on in Europe. I don't know if you saw this Eurovision contest that they have every year, but there was a contestant in the Eurovision contest from Israel. Why don't you take a look at what happened there? So it's not just college campuses. So people are talking about what's going on college campuses. What's going on college campuses is just a small part of this global protest. I haven't seen anything like this since what happened in the 1990s with South Africa apartheid. This looks very reminiscent to that movement. Not as many stars, though. I haven't heard Bono come out and say anything about what's going on in Israel and Gaza yet. But and you did in 1990s with South Africa, all the stars, Bono, all of the Hollywood singers, they all got involved in that. They are conspicuously silent right now, and many of them are conspicuously silent with what's going on in Israel. But this was the Eurovision is what it's called. Eurovision contestant from Israel. Take a listen. She's getting booed at all these protests. So they've had all these protests all over Europe. It's going on. It's going on here, not only at the college campuses again. They protested the Met Gala. They protested the Correspondents Dinner. They're shutting down traffic. Palestine is the movement going on in the summer. So again, that's why Joe Biden wants Bibi to go in and finish this quick so this doesn't go on throughout the summer. So they were talking about this 2 weeks ago on The View. And this was in the aftermath of all the colleges and those encampments being raided at I guess it was Penn State, and at here at UCLA, other colleges all over, at colleges in Portland, all over the colleges everywhere. But it's not. But what I'm saying is, it's not just the colleges, because college is going to be over next week. This point, and that's why I want to make sure that I'm clear about the fact that this is not just going on in colleges, because college is going to be over next week. And will the protests continue once the semester's over? And I think they will. Everything points to the fact that they will. But this is what Sonny Hostin said about these protesters that are protesting what's going on in Gaza. Take a listen.
I think it's, I think we need to shift the framing of these college protests, in fact, in my view. I think college campuses have been the place for anti-war protests for as far as I can remember. I think recent protests haven't even reached the scale of the major student protests that we saw in the late 1960s against the Vietnam War, or even the 1980s against South Africa's practice of apartheid. We saw calls during apartheid to divest from South African companies, and that was very successful. Nelson Mandela said he believed that's what led, in many respects, to South Africa being freed from that system. And so I think these are anti-war protests, and I think it's very distressing.
So she says that these are anti-war protests, and that's not what they are at all. These are not anti-war protests. These are anti-Israel protests. They don't want it. They don't believe that Israel should exist. They're not anti-war protests. If they were anti-war protests, they would be protesting what's going on in Ukraine. They would be protesting what's going on in Syria. They would be protesting what's going on in Africa. I mean, these people have been silent for decades. Not decades, but for years, they've been silent. Since the Obama administration, the anti-war movement has been dead. There was a anti-war movement in the United States during the Bush administration. One of the last big anti-war demonstrations that I remember was the Cindy Sheehan. If you guys remember, Cindy Sheehan in 2005 started bringing all these people to George Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas, and they were protesting the war in Iraq. Her son had gotten killed in Iraq, and she went to protest in the summer while George Bush was on his summer break at his ranch in Crawford, and it was this huge protest. And that happened in 2005. And then in 2006, there was this huge swing in the election. And that's when Nancy Pelosi becomes the first female Speaker of the House. Democrats win all of these seats in Congress. And the anti-war movement kind of resides because they see that, oh, okay, we won an election. Now the Democrats control Congress. We don't need to be active anymore. The Democrats will defund the war. They will hold Bush accountable. Nancy Pelosi did none of that. She kept funding the wars. She didn't impeach Bush and hold him accountable, but that's what people thought. So that's why they stopped protesting. And then Obama was elected in 2008, and then that was the end of the anti-war movement, because if you were going to be anti-war at that point, you had to protest against Obama, and they were not prepared to protest against Obama. But these protesters have been silent through everything. And you're going to tell me that they're anti-war protesters all of a sudden, that they feel some way about war? All of a sudden, where you been? This guy, Douglas Murray, who is a British author, was on the Bill Maher show on Friday night, and he says exactly what I was just saying. Where have these guys been? I mean, they're not anti-war protests. This is not about anti-war. Take a listen.
My view is that and I've seen the conflict up close, and I still believe that, first of all, you can't just put out 80% of a fire. You have to put out the whole thing. You can't destroy 80% of Hamas. You can't not get the leader who masterminded the 7th, Sinwar. And that's all in Rafah. And the second thing is, I don't think there's any law of war that says you can start a war and then when you begin to lose it, you say, let's pretend we didn't start it.
But that is always what Israel faces.
Sure. It's very strange. A year before I was in Ukraine, I was with the Ukrainian armed forces when they were retaking land from the Russians.
Very strange.
And nobody was saying, oh, hold on, don't win too much.
Yeah, don't win too much.
Every Western leader.
Yeah, they're egging on Ukraine to kill more Russians and for Russians to kill more Ukraine. They're in full support of that war. Yeah, give Ukraine as much money as they need. Keep funding that war. How can they be anti-war activists and they are not against the war in Ukraine? Explain that to me. No one's saying anything about the war in Ukraine. And they're anti-war activists, Sonny? Nothing could be more ridiculous. They're anti-Israel activists.
It's very strange. A year before I was in Ukraine, I was with the Ukrainian armed forces when they were retaking land from the Russians, and nobody was saying, oh, hold on, don't win too much. Everyone was egging them on. Every Western leader gets a shot of testosterone whenever they talk about the Ukrainian armed forces. And yet the Israelis never allowed to win.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Make it make sense. Make it make sense. So Mark Milley, this guy, I tell you what, never been a big fan of Mark Milley, but he's the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Trump. You remember Milley, he came out against Trump. And he says something very interesting in this forum the other day. It went viral. I don't know if you've heard it, but I want you to take a listen to what Milley says here.
Israel has a right to defend itself. They were the one who was attacked brutally on the 7th of October. 1,200 people were slaughtered, not just killed in the conduct of war. They were slaughtered, beheaded, butchered, raped in front of their husbands. It was stuff that was not even a hair's breadth removed from what the Nazis did. And if you take the math and do 1,200 and apply it to the United States, that'd be 50 to 100,000 people dead in a morning. Can you imagine what we would do? Seriously. So Israel has every right to defend itself. War is a horrible thing. I got a lot of
Absolutely.
Years of combat, been shot at, blown up, the whole 9 yards, right? It's a horrible, brutal, vicious thing.
Don't start one.
And unfortunately, because the character of war is going to be in dense urban areas, that the very conduct of war is going to have very high levels of collateral damage. There's almost no way around it. But if there's any morality at all, you need to get into it, achieve your political objectives, get it done fast, and get it over with.
That's what Joe Biden is telling Bibi. Get in, get it done fast, and get it over with. And that's exactly what Joe Biden is privately telling Bibi, and publicly he's saying, well, publicly, because the State Department's putting out this report saying that they haven't violated any international humanitarian laws. So it still doesn't make any sense why he's holding up weapons then. But Milley says something else here. I thought it was in this clip. I guess they edited it out. But he says something else in that clip. And Van Hollen, Senator Van Hollen from, what state is he from? I'm not sure what state he's from. But Senator Van Hollen was on Face the Nation yesterday, and he was asked about this portion of Milley's statements that are not included in the clip that I just played. Take a listen.
This week, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, said, before we get self-righteous about what Israel is doing, we shouldn't forget the U.S. killed a lot of innocent people in Iraq, in Syria. He said the U.S. killed 12,000 innocent French civilians, bombed Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 69 Japanese cities. What do you make of statements like that? Because Prime Minister Netanyahu says something very similar.
So that's what Milley says. Milley says, before you start, to the protesters out there, before you start getting on Israel for the operation that they're conducting, you need to understand what your country did, what we did. Where were you protesting when we were killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqis? When we were killing thousands of innocent people in our drone strike operations. And when Obama had his kill list and he was going around killing people and he didn't care how many non-combatant civilians he killed in the process, thousands. She says here, Millie says that we dropped bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We've killed so many civilians. Joe Biden killed a family of 12 or so, droned them on our way out of Afghanistan. Where were these protesters? That was just 2 years ago. Where were you protesting and taking over campuses for that family that Joe Biden droned in Afghanistan? And all of a sudden, you're anti-war activists? That's what Millie said, and that's what Margaret here asked Van Hollen about. I want you to take a listen to his answer.
Chiefs Mark Milley said, before we get self-righteous about what Israel is doing, we shouldn't forget the U.S. killed a lot of innocent people in Iraq, in Syria. He said the U.S. killed 12,000 innocent French civilians, bombed Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 69 Japanese cities. What do you make of statements like that? Because Prime Minister Netanyahu says something very similar.
Well, Margaret, there's no doubt that, the United States has not been perfect, far from perfect. But since World War II, we've adopted many more measures to try to
since World War II
civilian harm, and we try to improve.
So since World War II, we've adopted many measures to prevent civilian harm. Buddy, I'm sorry. No, we haven't. U.S. airstrikes kill at least 22,000 civilians since 9/11. 22,000 civilians, and these are the drone strikes. As many as 48,000 since 9/11 terrorist attacks, 2001's droned. What are you talking about? 20 years on the shocking numbers behind the Iraq War. 2009, 982 are the number of Iraqi civilians killed between 2003 and 2020. We killed 2,000. That's 2,000 souls. 200,000. 200,000. More than 200,000 souls that we killed. So no, I don't know what you're talking about, Van Hollen, that we don't kill civilians. We kill a lot of civilians. And yes, Israel's killing a lot of civilians. That's what happens in war. So, real briefly, we're going to get back into this in the next podcast. I want to talk about the political threat to Joe Biden, what Joe Biden is up against, and why getting Israel to go into Rafah, finishing this quickly so this ends and Joe Biden doesn't have these protests and demonstrations going on throughout the summer and into the fall. This poll is just one of the recent polls that came out this weekend. This is the RCP poll, just swing states. It shows up Trump up 2 points in Pennsylvania. In Arizona, Trump's up 5.2 points. In Nevada, Trump's up by 6.2 points. These are the 7 swing states that I explained to you in the last podcast that are going to decide this election. Georgia, Trump's up 4.6 points. In Wisconsin, Trump's up 0.6 points. In Michigan, Trump's up 0.8 points. So these are the 2 important states, Michigan and Wisconsin, because they have the large Muslim populations. North Carolina, Trump's up 5.4%. Again, this is only one poll that has come out in the last weekend. Several others have come out showing Trump up in every single swing state. This is Larry Tribe. Larry Tribe is the law professor. I think he teaches at, I'm not sure what university Larry Tribe teaches at. I think it's Yale. I think he teaches at Yale Law. Anyway, Larry Tribe tweeted this out this weekend, and it's from a CNN poll that showed that Trump is up in every swing state. And this is a quote paragraph from the article. Trump is now leading in almost all swing states, and behind those numbers lie an even more troubling detail. As someone worried about the prospects of a second Trump term, I think that it's best to be honest about the reality. I understand that polls are not always accurate, but in general, they have tended to underestimate. Oh, you know what this is? This isn't from the CNN poll. This quote right here from this that Lawrence Tribe tweeted out is from the Fareed Zakaria monologue that went viral. Let's listen to Fareed Zakaria.
I have to admit, none of this is playing out as I thought it would. Trump is now leading in almost all the swing states, but behind those numbers lie even more troubling details. As someone worried about the prospects of a second Trump term, I think it's best to be honest about reality. I understand that polls are not always accurate, but in general, they have tended to underestimate Donald Trump's support, not overestimate it.
Absolutely.
I doubt that there are many shy Biden voters in the country. The economy
there may be some dead ones.
Recovery for more than 2 years now, with unemployment hitting a 54-year low in 2023 and increasing only slightly since then. But Biden is getting little credit for it. The shift here is stark. On the question of who voters trust more to deal with the economy, Trump has a 22-point lead over Biden, according to an NBC poll from January. This marks a 15-point bump for Trump compared to the same poll in 2020. Perhaps this is because inflation is a far more pervasive problem than unemployment, affecting all Americans every day. Perhaps it's because people's views on the economy now are largely derived from their broader attitudes towards the candidates. But whatever the reasons, it's a stunning reversal in the midst of a relentless stream of good economic news. On cultural issues, Biden and Democrats benefit from the opposition to the Republican Party's position on abortion. But on the other great cultural issue, immigration, Biden is 35 points behind Trump as to who would handle it better. And I do wonder whether abortion will be as large an issue in a presidential race, given that reversing Roe v. Wade threw the issue to state governments and legislatures and not the federal government. Perhaps the most worrying new trend for the Democrats is that far from being the more unified party, they are now bitterly divided over the war in Gaza.
You're going to see why this matters.
Has said the eruption of pro-Palestinian protests could be Biden's Vietnam, and even invoked the specter of Lyndon Johnson choosing not to run for re-election in 1968 because of the opposition to that war. The analogy is far-fetched. America then was itself sending hundreds of thousands of troops to Vietnam, with more being recruited from college campuses every week. But there's no denying that the party seems more openly divided than it has been in decades. Only 33% of Americans said they approved of Biden's handling of the Israel-Hamas war, which is now opposed both by people who think he is too soft and people who think he is too hard on Israel. Meanwhile, Republicans seem to be uniting behind Trump. Whatever opposition he faced in the primaries has largely melted away. And the trials against him keep him in the spotlight, infuriate his base, who sees him as a martyr, and even may serve to make him the object of some sympathy among people in general who believe that his prosecutors are politically motivated. This happens to be true, in my opinion. I doubt the New York indictment would have been brought against a defendant whose name was not Donald Trump.
Wow, Fareed.
The majority of Americans are skeptical that Trump will be able to get a fair trial, according to a CNN poll. And I haven't even mentioned Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West and...
All matters. All that matters. You're going to see here.
Probably take votes away from Biden.
All matters.
Things could change. Polls do suggest that were Trump to be convicted of a felony, it could shift votes in Biden's favor. The administration may be able to pull off a ceasefire in Gaza and then a broader political settlement that gives Palestinians political rights.
Listen.
Israel diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia.
Listen.
Trump could always embroil himself in some kind of scandal. But trend lines are not working in Biden's favor. He needs to do something bold and dramatic to seize the initiative, on asylum policy, for example, and reverse these numbers. The one that troubles me the most is on the question of who was the more competent.
See, this guy's supposed to be a journalist, and yes, he's given all this true information, but he's telling you that, that he's supporting Joe Biden because these numbers trouble me. Why are you troubled? You shouldn't have a dog in the hunt. You're a journalist. Even if you do, I don't need to know about it, Fareed, that you're supporting Biden and that you're troubled by these numbers. I'm not troubled by it. I mean,
is on the question of who was the more competent. Joe Biden led Donald Trump by 9 points in 2020, but Trump now leads by 16 points in January 2024. That 25-point shift could be a reflection of people's sense that the president's age is affecting his capacity to govern. And there's very little that Joe Biden can do now to change that perception.
So a lot of people are saying that, I want to go back to this part of what Fareed says right here.
Diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. Trump could always embroil himself in some kind of scandal. But trend lines are not working in Biden's favor. He needs to do something bold and dramatic to seize the initiative.
He needs to do something bold and dramatic to seize the initiative. That's very interesting what Fareed Zakaria says there, that the trend lines, and I'm going to tell you what Fareed is looking at here, because he's looking at a certain model that all these Democrats look at, and they trust this model because that's what they're all about, is about data, figuring out models, spitting information into these models and have these models predict the future for them. They believe in that, even though the models are often wrong, not always, but often wrong. They believe in data models. And so that's what he's talking about. He's talking about a specific data model that I'm going to tell you about here in a moment. But he says that Biden needs to do something bold to change, the winds, to change the way that this is going. Something bold. What is he saying? Let's listen to it again.
To seize the initiative on asylum policy. Bold and dramatic to seize.
Bold and dramatic. He needs to do something bold and dramatic. It made me think about in 2008 when Barack Obama was running against John McCain. And John McCain wins the nomination because it was his turn. That he, in 2000, when he ran against George W. Bush, he won the first two primaries. They slaughtered him in South Carolina with this really, really dirty campaign. John McCain ends up endorsing George W. Bush, and basically he's next. That's the way the Republican Party works, is that if you come in second in the primaries in the previous year, then essentially, then you're next. So John McCain got the nomination in 2008. And I guess it was in the summer of 2008, and they're running this campaign. Obama had already won the Democratic nomination. He's the Republican nominee. And I guess it was around August, his team, John McCain's team, comes to him and tells him, "Sir, you're going to lose this election, and there's nothing you can do about it." And John McCain famously said, "We need a game change." And that's why the book about the 2008 election is called Game Change. They also made a movie about it. Game Change is what John McCain's, his bold and what does he say again? Bold and dramatic. His bold and dramatic game change to change the winds for the election. It was picking Sarah Palin as his running mate. But the interesting part is that they told him, based on their internal polling, that you're going to lose and there's nothing you can do about it. And of course he was going to lose, because it wasn't about John McCain. And these elections, as you're going to see this model that I'm getting ready to explain to you, it's not about individuals. It's not about candidates. It's about parties, about the party in power, that people vote for the party, and it doesn't matter who the candidate is that is representing that party. And there's a two-party system, and it is a vote on the party in power if that party deserves to get reelected. The polls mean nothing, quite frankly. This is what this guy says. And tons of people were coming out after all these negative polls came out showing that Biden's losing in all the swing states. And take a listen to what this guy says.
Look, I think the polling now, it's like trying to predict the weather in November. In an election this close, it just doesn't tell you much when you've got a lot of these things that are either within or very close to the margin of error. It's going to be a really close election. And I think the clip you just showed is emblematic of some of the things that Joe Biden has to do. He has to remind voters what they hated about Donald Trump. And one of the things they hated is that he's a chaos agent.
So the polls, he's saying the polls are like predicting the weather in November at this time, that we shouldn't trust the polls. And he's right about that. The polls are a snapshot. You can't really trust the polls, but the polls kind of show you the direction that things are going in. And that's why, Fareed Zakaria is saying that Biden needs to do something bold and dramatic. That's why this guy's saying that Biden needs to do something to change the wins. It's not that the polls aren't correct right now at this time in space, but Biden still has the ability to do something, like change his running mate, get rid of Kamala Harris, put somebody else on, whatever, idea that Fareed just said, something bold and dramatic. You can't trust the polls, but what you can trust is my man, Alan Lichtman. And Alan Lichtman is the egghead professor that created the model, the data model that these guys really trust. He's the one who created the model that Fareed Zakaria was referencing here in his monologue. Fareed Zakaria is not just referencing polls. He's referencing Alan Lichtman's data model. And Alan Lichtman's data model is based on 13 different keys. And that's why you heard Fareed Zakaria make reference to the Gaza and Israeli conflict, the protests. He made reference to the economy. He made reference to the infighting within the Democratic Party. Every single one of those references is a different key in Alan Lichtman's model to predict presidents. And this guy has, with his model, has predicted every single presidential election correctly for the past 40 years. And let me tell you something. The Democrats, these academic, what does Katie Tur call them? The intelligentsia. They trust these models, and they definitely trust models when they're as accurate as Alan Lichtman's model. We're going to listen to a little bit of this interview with Alan Lichtman, kind of explain what the models are, then what the model is, and these 13 keys, and then we'll pick this up on Friday. We'll go deep into this model and talk more about these protests and how they threaten Biden. Take a listen.
About it's Professor Alan Lichtman, who's correctly predicted 9 of the last 10 elections. And the one he got wrong, 2000, he argues he actually got right, since Al Gore beat George W.
He didn't get it wrong. He didn't get 2000 wrong. He picked Al Gore in 2000, and Al Gore won in 2000. I'll debate that with anyone.
Bush in the popular vote. So if not the polls, what's he using as his barometer? Well, Lichtman says we should follow his 13 keys to the White House. Now, they're all listed here for you, and they include things like incumbency and third-party candidates, the state of the economy, and, of course, social unrest. Now,
social unrest. And, of course, social unrest is what she says. Now, social unrest, that's the one that pertains to all of these protests, all the Black Lives Matter in 2020. On Friday, when we pick this up, we're going to show you how Lichtman, when Black Lives Matter, I'm going to show you Lichtman's prediction before Black Lives Matter and Lichtman's prediction after Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. And again, so the social unrest, the party mandate, the incumbency. So people were saying that Joe Biden is going to be removed at the convention. Well, no, they're not going to move him at the convention because he has to be the incumbent. He has to run as the incumbent so it doesn't trigger one of Lichtman's keys. So we're going to look at all of these 13 keys in the next podcast and see what these 13 keys in Lichtman's data model tell us about what's going to happen in November. And we'll pick it up on Friday. I hope you guys have a great week. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please share the podcast if you enjoyed the podcast, and I'll see you guys on Friday. Thank you so much.